Welcome to General Counselling, the Montresor Legal podcast that brings a leading in-house lawyer together with a law firm partner to get their insights on the latest issues from across the legal profession. We've got some brilliant episodes coming up and would love your help getting the podcast out there. So hit subscribe, or to make us really happy, give us a like or a share on LinkedIn. Today's episode, we're covering mental health and well-being. This is an episode I've been really looking forward to because the topic is just so important. It's one of the biggest challenges facing the industry. And while there has been undeniable progress in recent years in openly discussing mental health at work, it is still a topic many leaders and organisations find difficult to address. And given the events of this year, it's only becoming more important. We're extremely lucky to be joined by two lawyers with real expertise in the field. From in-house, Joanne Theodoulou. Joanne trained at Linklaters before taking on senior roles in banking and fintech, and is currently the general counsel and company secretary at insurtech player Simply Business, the largest online business and insurance provider in the UK. She's also a trustee and board member at Mind, the mental health charity, and a leading mental health advocate. From private practice, we're joined by Adele Martins, head of the employment practice at Magrath Sheldrick. Magrath are one of the leading boutiques within the employment and immigration field, and Adele combines first-class knowledge of the law with a significant interest in mental health in the workplace. Thank you both for joining us on General Counselling. So, I guess the first question when we're looking at this to Joanne, why is it so important that we talk about mental health openly?
Hi, Tom. Hi. I think one of the key things is that we talk fairly openly about our physical health, I would say. It doesn't seem to be too difficult to say to somebody, oh, I see you've broken your arm. What happened? How are you? But somehow if someone isn't looking terribly well, hasn't slept very well, perhaps isn't performing very well, it seems to be a lot harder to ask what's going on for them, which might be something in their emotional or in their emotional life or their mental health. I think we've got quite good at, as I said, looking after our physical health as well, but there does remain quite a stigma around mental health challenges. And it's been shown time and again that actually the best way to tackle stigma is to bring stories out in the open and to talk about things, because once something is out in the open, that's the only way you can really tackle things.
Yeah, the how are you question that you hear a lot of people refer to.
Yes, and it's how are you, but not just what we often get, and perhaps lawyers are particularly guilty of it, which is how are you? Oh, I'm busy.
That's everyone's always busy.
Busy is quite often means I might be too busy to talk to you, or I just want to show you that I've got loads of really important work to do. But what it does do is it tends to close down a conversation, certainly a personal one, and tends to open up a work-related conversation. And you almost wear that busyness as a badge of honour. And I suppose what's happened a little bit in 2020, and I hope that will stay the case going forward, when someone asks you, how are you? They actually mean the question. They really want to know how you are. And if you have a good and a trusting relationship with that person, you might just tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
Do you think it's sort of more a stigma to mention in the workplace? I think it's a really difficult subject, particularly for employers to bring up, because they don't know when to stop, where to cross the line, what the difficulty is. And I certainly know, from my clients, when they've got someone who is clearly not well but is not recognising it, they don't know how far they can go, what they can say, when to introduce the occupational health question. Is there anything you can sort of suggest around that? From your experience, it's a really difficult one for them.
It is difficult, and in a way the problem has built up over time, because if you have a culture which is already fairly open and understanding, then you are not waiting until someone is actually in crisis or visibly not able to cope before you are asking them how they are.
Okay.
Hopefully, if you are managing things properly along the way, you're going to pick these things up more early. But of course, that isn't always the case, and there will be things that get to quite a critical level quite quickly. But I think there is more of a recognition that actually employers do have a responsibility for the well-being of their people. And, you know, that I would say has always been the case sort of morally, you know, but actually I think now it is being recognised more that looking after your people is more than the right thing to do. We should be trying to do that.
I think it encourages, certainly from sort of my experience of working with clients on it, where the process has been managed properly and efficiently from day one, with, you know, genuine interest in mental health and well-being of the workforce and the people that are being managed. The problems don't tend to arise as crises, as you say. I think the difficulty is when they're not managed consistently, when it's not an open dialogue, and it's not, you know, I know your organisation is really progressive around this, which is fantastic, but so many organisations that I still speak with, the minute the word stress comes up, you can almost see the panic in someone's eyes that, you know, an employee said they're stressed. What does this mean? How do they manage it? And I think that's a real difficulty for them. I mean, hopefully, as you say, 2020, more open dialogue will encourage people to actually be on top of it and maybe be more open about it.
And I think this is where programs like awareness training and actually equipping people with the right skills, and people, I mean, you know, start with your managers, start with people who are actually responsible for other people. And when you're responsible for somebody's work, you are to a degree responsible for their ability to do that work well.
Good point.
And that means, you know, if they're not in a good place, they won't be as productive. They might be suffering cognitively. They might, you know, not have trouble concentrating, and you know, sometimes you can see that in the output of their work. But having that awareness of what, you know, things that you might be seeing and what might be behind them prompts you to ask, hopefully, the right questions and just be a bit more attuned to things. But what I often hear is, you know, oh, we've had all this awareness training and now, you know, we're all conscious of this mental health thing, but we still don't know what to do. We still don't know what to do if somebody comes and tells us that they have a problem. And then, as I said there, that, you know, that trying to equip people to have those conversations, I think, is really important. But also recognizing that, you know, it isn't necessarily your colleague's job to be, you know, to actually provide a mental health help or therapy, but it is their job to maybe try and point you to somewhere that can help, or at least, you know, set you up in a way that you have the space and the time to go away and do that. A little bit like, as I said before, if somebody came to you with a physical health problem, you wouldn't be there trying to fix it for them, but you would be sort of saying, well, what do you need? Okay, you've got that appointment on Tuesday. That's fine. Take Tuesday off. Okay, what has the doctor said? Okay, I understand. Let's take some of your work off you this week, or whatever it might be. It's like, what do you need? What can we do to help you back in the best way possible?
And that really, if you're responsible for someone at work, there are three elements to that, aren't there? There's the moral obligation to make sure that the people that you're looking after are happy and contented. There's a risk management element to make sure that if there is a problem, that you are doing the right things to help them through it. But there's also an opportunity cost. If that person who you've hired on the basis that you probably think they're very good at what they do is struggling, they're not going to be as good at what they do. And then even, you know, outside the risk stuff, they're not going to be as good at their job, and you're losing the talent or the contribution that person may make.
I think it's perhaps, I mean, it's certainly harder to spot at the moment with significant numbers working from home. I think that has prevented a lot of the sort of maybe more natural signposting that would go on, not necessarily manager level downwards. The teams you're managing, I think organizations have been very efficient in putting in place structures to ensure that managers are regularly checking in. But actually, a lot of the problems sort of at a manager level are highlighted not by the individual themselves, but by their peers spotting it. You know, I think so-and-so is struggling. I think so-and-so's got too much work on. And I know from a couple of clients that I've spoken to, the difficulty they're finding in managing teams remotely is the lack of peer-to-peer water cooler conversation, whatever you want to call it, where somebody spots the issue. I know myself, I found it harder with my team spotting issues, managing workload. So if you're managing a larger team, I can imagine that's very difficult across an organisation. Is there anything that can be done, Joanne, do you think, to assist that?
I think there's a few things. I'd like to come back to stress in a minute and talk about that in particular. But actually, just in terms of, what I would call, good management anyway, things that we might have been doing anyway, but really need to sort of come to the top of the list now while we're all remote, is things like, the check-in, the one-to-one with your direct reports, sitting down with them, even if it's just once a fortnight, but for half an hour, just giving them that space and time to talk about how they are. And that's something that, you might, some of that conversation will be about the work they've got on, but really it's about how are they coping, what's going on in their lives, how are they doing? And that's a two-way thing as well, I would say. It doesn't, I think some of those best conversations come when you share a little bit about yourself as well, rather than just, making it feel a little bit like you are prying into somebody else's life. But actually, if you know through those sorts of conversations that someone is in perhaps the middle of moving house, or they've just had a new baby, or they've got a teenage child who's struggling, whatever it might be, a partner who's been made redundant, just having that awareness that, they are bringing that to work with them every day. They've got something else that is already making their capacity to deal with yet more stressful things reduced. And sometimes even just by them sharing that, it helps, rather than feeling like, oh, I've got to, I mustn't talk about that. And I must block that bit out of my diary, but I'm not going to put in where I really am. Actually bringing those things out in the open kind of makes it okay. And it does, it helps a lot. So I would say the, formal and informal proper check-ins with your people, as well as obviously time to talk about the work that they're doing and so on, is one thing that I think is really important at the moment.
And I think, just sort of coming back to stress, I know you and I have spoken about this previously, and sort of the fact that, certain people I think are naturally predisposed to stressful environments. And I think one of the difficulties we've got at the moment is workloads for many people haven't actually changed that much. They are managing, I'll put my hands up to it, I'm managing a team plus clients plus kids plus all of the other things that have come with this pandemic. And I think lawyers are really not necessarily well equipped at dealing with stress. We deal with it because it's there and we have to, but as you said earlier, I think there is that tendency, I know I will always say, if someone says, oh, how are you? Oh, so busy, I've got so much on. Which is actually true, but it's also a way I don't want to talk about it. And I think that's a real difficulty.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny actually, because you're reminding me of my law firm days where, sometimes the sequel to that, I'm busy, might be good busy or bad busy. And actually that's an question itself, because again, talking about stress, there is a level of stress that is actually quite a good thing. Having a deadline, having something that you need to do that's important, can give you that bit of adrenaline, that bit of motivation, a sort of a sense of urgency or purpose can actually drive you. I think that the difficulties come when that stress turns into sort of distress effectively, where actually you've got so much going on in your brain that your ability to prioritize effectively and to know when actually that's enough, I've done enough on that now, I can turn my hand to something else, that's good enough. Those things are really quite difficult for lawyers. And as you mentioned, they are often the type of people who go into the profession and excel in the profession tend to be people who really enjoy a challenge. They enjoy having a lot to do. They love, the importance of their work, and actually turning around and saying, I can't take on anymore, or, I've done the draft. I think it is good enough. The client will be happy with it. I'm going to stop there. it's very difficult. And in a way, I do think that our in-house colleagues have a little bit of an advantage there, because it's often it's often the clients within the business who just sort of say, that will do fine, I just wanted a quick view, can I have it now? Whereas perhaps if you're a lawyer in a law firm, you would feel obliged to produce a 3-page memo with perfect grammar and perfect everything. You know, most CEOs don't care about that. They just want the top 3 points quick, you know.
And that is really hard to get across to junior lawyers. It's really hard to, you know, I repeat the mantra, and I know I've stolen it from someone, it's certainly not my own. You know, done is better than perfect. 95% is good enough, because to go for 100%, you know, the reason there are so many lawyers in the world is none of us agree on anything. And, you know, my perfect will not be your perfect, because you may spot a comma that I've missed, but would you rather have that document, or would you rather me obsess over the last comma? And I think that is something that it's really hard to communicate to juniors, because, you know, they've gone through their careers striving for the A's, striving for, you know, to excel at law school, to fight for competitive training places, to be the person who's jumping up and saying, me, I want it, give me the extra work. And then suddenly they're overwhelmed and still asking for more. And I think that's a real difficulty, a real challenge for lawyers in private practice, and, you know, and in business as well.
I think it shows though that there are different stresses in private practice and in-house, but what we've certainly seen is the stress. Have we lost? She's back. Sorry, we lost you there for 2 secs. You back?
Yeah, I am.
Fine, perfect. So going back to talking about the differences, the stresses on private practice and in-house lawyers, the people we've probably noticed the biggest stress that have been the juniors, who would have been sitting with a more experienced lawyer, listening to them, hearing their phone calls, and being able to go and talk to their contemporaries around the water cooler about whatever challenges they were having. And they're also the people who probably don't have a home setup that is as luxurious, or whatever you want to phrase it. They might be in a house share, or so those guys, as well as having this like huge stress of job security and the number of trainees that are going to be kept on, and all those sorts of things. But then you look a bit more senior, and you have the level of stress people are exposed to when they're making runs at partner is pretty insane, especially in the larger firms. And those people especially, really, I think probably they don't feel comfortable to talk about it as much, because it's such an important part of their career, and they don't want to be exposed to anything that might have a negative impact of their ability to do that. But then you also then get the people who go in-house, and suddenly they don't have the support of a mega law firm and all its resources behind them, and they've got their clients in the same building as them who may well ask them things they don't know and expect, you know, answers on them from them very quickly. And that ultimately there's normally a pool of work that is, you know, you can never finish it. There's always going to be something else you could do, and how you manage it. So as you say, lawyers are just very, very, they're perfectionists, they work hard, and some of them absolutely thrive off the stress, but there isn't a bit of anyone's career where they're going to go somewhere and there isn't the ability to get quite stressed out by things.
I think that's right. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I think for me, the difficulty is that so many clients hear the words, not necessarily stress, but perhaps the bigger ticket words around anxiety, around depression, and respond by seeing litigation risk. And I think for me, I do hear clients say, look, this person's been diagnosed with depression, they've got anxiety, I have no idea how we're going to manage them, the workplace is too pressurized, how do we get them out? And that is such a soul destroying thing to hear, because actually chances are it's a blip, or it is something that they will learn to manage with the right resources in place. And as you were saying earlier, Tom, you know, you've spent time and effort and money recruiting this person, training this person, they know the working environment. You've got to do all that again with someone new. And yet I think people are still so scared of managing it and attempting to manage it because of the litigation risk. But, you know, Sorry, Joanne, I
Yeah.
know you've got a lot of thoughts on this, because it's a difficult topic for certainly for my clients. And you know, by the time it comes to an employment lawyer, you are normally talking litigation risk or crisis management rather than the early stages of it.
But yeah, and I think that's where it comes back to your first question, Tom, about, you know, why talk about this, why bring it out into the open, and that's, you know, trying to reduce stigma is something that is just so important to me. I just think it's critical for exactly this reason, that people are, you know, we've talked about sort of thriving and being, and you know, things being great. We've talked about you know, struggling with your mental health, struggling with stress and being overloaded, but still managing. But then there's a sharp end of it, which is actually being mentally ill. So that could be a depression diagnosis. It could be something else where actually you are not functioning properly, you are not well. And that's often, as you say, when you go to an employer, they might be thinking litigation risk. On a personal level, if they haven't had experience of it themselves or with other people they know, they're probably quite scared because they don't know what to expect. They don't know what the road to recovery looks like. They don't know how long it's going to take or what it might involve. They don't know, you know, if it's your mind rather than some other body part that has given up on you for a while. You know, that is your main tool, especially as a lawyer. That is the bit that needs to be functioning, you know, crystal clear, absolutely well. And if that's the broken bit, there can be a lot of, like, as you say, oh my goodness, don't know really what to do with this person. How can we get rid of them? Which is why, coming back to the first point, the more you talk about it, the more people who can come forward and speak about their own recovery and show what they've done in their, you know, how that was for them and what it looks like. And you can look at somebody and think, oh yeah, that person had depression 10 years ago. They're a partner in a firm now. You know, they've either, they've moved on and that doesn't affect them anymore, or it affects them, but actually they can manage that.
How do you feel that the workplace has moved on over the last few years in addressing those sorts of issues? Because it was absolutely something that historically was very, very taboo. You feel that there's been some progress now, but what do you think? How much progress has been made in the last few years?
It's really hard to say. I mean, there are some actual statistics on this. You may have heard of a campaigning body called Time to Change, which is in partnership with Mind, actually. But Time to Change is an anti-stigma campaign that's been going for about 10 years. And it's not just about workplace, it's about across the board. And those surveys over time sort of show, you know, they sort of survey people in the public and they ask them about their attitudes to mental health. And they are questions like, would you share a flat with someone who had a mental illness? Would you marry someone who has a mental illness? Would you employ somebody? How would you feel about this? And those have sort of been done over time. And, you know, there is something like an 8% improvement in attitudes, which sounds like progress, but actually the vast majority of people feel extremely uncomfortable being asked those questions firstly and admitting their true feelings. And I think that, you know, I do believe that recently there is, you know, there are many more conversations, there's a lot more awareness, there is a lot more understanding, but we're nowhere near, it's nowhere near enough.
I agree with that. I think clients are starting to think about it very clearly and definitively from a policy perspective, certainly. And I tend to see that, you know, policy drives change rather than the other way around. So, you know, people are talking about, whereas once upon a time, you know, it was a sickness absence policy or it was a health and safety policy, we are now being asked specifically to draft policies around mental health and wellbeing. And some clients actually splitting, you know, health sort of care wellbeing policies into things like mental health, physical health, and emotional health. I was asked by a client to draft one, splitting the three out this week. But that is, I do think, as Joanne said, it's really early days around. I think on mental health, my analogy would be, on mental health, we are probably where race was 20 or 30 years ago. people are not, it is something that people are becoming aware of, are aware and thinking about it, but they're not anywhere close to where they need to be, I think, to prevent some of the problems that do arise in workplaces. Would that be your sense, Jo, or am I just the
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And again, just to draw on the kind of wider societal issue is that, you know, this is not, as with many of the issues out there, they don't start in the workplace. They start with, you know, all sorts of things, how you're brought up, the stories you hear as a child, the people you meet, what you're exposed to. But also in the case of sort of, you know, mental versus physical health, if you know, support services are woefully funded, underprepared. There are, you know, psychiatry is still seen a little bit as the kind of, you know, not the first choice of medical students to go into research. There's not enough of it. It really is, you know, the more you get to know about this whole area, we're still in the dark ages. And we are now catching up as fast as we can, trying to, but there's a long way to go. So, you know, in a way, there is a hope that actually workplaces, being the businesses and you know, may be able to help drive some change there.
If you look, we did a podcast a few weeks ago on diversity and representation, and one of the things that the guys were talking there that they really are pushing there is to have mentors and senior people from underrepresented backgrounds who then become you know, leaders that can help junior people. And I think it's interesting, there's very little of that in this area where, Joanne, you said earlier on, you know, this person who's a partner or a GC used to have a mental health challenge that everyone knows about, and look how well they've subsequently done, having overcome that and been successful in their career by making partnership or getting a GC job or whatever it would be. But there isn't very much of that, I guess, because of the taboo attached to it still.
Yeah, so there are some really great initiatives actually out there where, you know, senior leaders across the board in different businesses are coming out and telling their stories and being quite open about it. You may have seen there's one called This Is Me in the City. The This Is Me campaign is one like that, where all sorts of companies have made very, very short little videos of their people. So somebody will come forward and they'll say, hi, I'm so-and-so, I work in this department, I do this, that and the other, and I, you know, have an adult eating disorder, and they'll talk a little bit about this. But the way that campaign works is you see the condition they're living with is just one part of their life.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like Theresa May and her diabetes. She has diabetes. It's not the thing we know about her and the thing we remember her for. You know, I myself was diagnosed with bipolar disorder 20 years ago. It is something I live with and I've learned to manage over the years, but it's not my defining sort of characteristics. It's one of many things that make me who I am. The other initiative I like is run by a chap called Rob Stevenson, which is called Inside Out. The Inside Out leaderboard is he's got a number of leaders across all sorts of businesses who've done similar things. They'll come out and tell a bit about their story. But they're advocates in their organizations, in their businesses as well, who will talk openly about mental health and mental ill health and challenges. And we've seen that time and time again. It is by sort of personal storytelling and exposure to people who are different to you in whatever aspect it is that you do start to break down those taboos and you start to normalize and make these things okay to talk about.
Because if someone that you aspire to be is openly talking about challenges that they personally have had, and it's something that you're going through as well, that would be, you could see why that would be such a powerful motivator, or something that would make you think, oh, okay, it's not just me, it's something that is very is very normal. But that's interesting, because I think those are the sorts of initiatives that you will make a massive impact to people who might be struggling on their own or not necessarily talking about it in some of these larger organizations.
They do. And then the other thing I would add as well is that the pressure and the stress of not being able to discuss your condition can be almost as bad as the condition itself.
Yeah.
You know, I know of people who've been having sort of weekly therapy sessions and they put in their diary physiotherapy because they don't want anyone to know where they really are. And it's like, 5 years on, are you still, is that back still troubling you? You know, what's going on? But actually the sort of hiding and not being able to actually just be yourself and always being worried that someone's going to find this out about you is another whole load of stress on top of what you're already dealing with. So actually, you know, sometimes, and we've seen this a lot through things like a mind survey, which we've done on our staff, once somebody has disclosed something to their manager and they've had a sort of empathetic response and a helpful response to that, they immediately start feeling a little bit better.
Starting the conversation, there's 2 points to it, isn't there? There's the person who is having the challenges, and then there are the people who they work with or for. Adele, how would you start a conversation with someone in your organisation that you thought may need some support or help?
I think that's a really difficult one. I do think it's a really difficult one. I think actually it comes down to personal relationships with your staff, because the way you would start a conversation with one person is perhaps very different to the way you would start a personal conversation with someone else. And I think the difficulty is, you know, physical health is often very apparent, mental health is often not. And I think that of itself makes it hard to know when to start that conversation. So coming back to what Joanne was saying, I think for me, the important thing, A, within my organisation, and B, for clients, is having those regular conversations early on. So it's not an out of the blue, I can see you're struggling, what's the matter? Because that's immediately such a negative connotation. I can see you're struggling. All right, so I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. My employer spotted that. Oh God, what next? And I do think it is a very, very difficult one. I think also, you know, employers, and I'll put my hand up to this, we're all particularly mindful around, you know, data protection. Who do we discuss this with? Do you discuss it with someone in their team and say to them, you know, notice so-and-so seems to be under a bit of pressure. Have you got any insight into that? Is that appropriate? Is that not appropriate? I'd say it's not, but then, you know, do you go directly to the team member and raise the question and risk throwing them off guard? And I think, you know, Joanne's point about making sure that you're regularly checking in means that's not a conversation you have to start. It is, for me, and the comment I make to clients is, this shouldn't be a conversation that you're phoning me to ask how you have. It should be ongoing dialogue. And that's hard to implement within an organisation that hasn't done it before. It's hard to get that ball rolling. I think for me, it is about openness with the individual in question and allowing them to have some control over the situation. You know, human beings don't like having choices taken away from them. They don't like a lack of control. Right now, we're living in a world where there's a hell of a lot of choice that's been taken away from us and an awful lot of control, which is contributing to mental health issues. I don't think a single client hasn't mentioned to me the difficulties that their teams are having with, and I use mental health, you know, right the way across the spectrum since the pandemic started. And I think for me, it is about making sure that the individual knows you're on their side, that the dialogue is ongoing and is open. And, you know, conversations like, do you think you should tell your team about this so that they can help to support you? You know, is that something that you want? Is that something you don't want? And if we're not going to do that, great, that's fine, that's your choice. But how do we manage it? And for me, it's so many employers and employees come at these situations sort of almost adversarially. And I don't think lawyers help that in many instances. You know, one of the things I sort of say to clients is, look, this you shall pass, whether it's whether I act for an individual or whether I'm acting for a corporate. You know, you're going to get through this, you're going to come out the other side, and the way you come out the other side is the important bit. The journey is the important bit, because actually, do the journey right, litigation risk disappears. You end up with a productive, healthy, valuable member of staff without putting sort of the management team through an awful lot of stress in trying to deal with it. And open dialogue is key to that.
And Joanne, from what advice would you give someone who is having mental health challenges and doesn't feel or doesn't know how they can open up or talk to people in their workplace?
I think there are a few things you can do. If you really don't know where to start, there are some actually fantastic helplines, and the one I would mention is Law Care. Law Care is a small charity that is all about helping to look after the mental health of lawyers across the whole profession. They have a helpline. The helpline is manned by people who have been lawyers themselves or are lawyers themselves and have been trained to take those calls and do it on a voluntary basis. And they can, pretty much any scenario that you're going to present to them, they will have come across it, and they can help match you to the right person to speak to. So if you're being bullied at work, if you're being overworked, if you are thinking about leaving, if you are, whatever it might be, if you're just not coping, you don't know how to start, I would say their help and advice is fantastic. But I would say, start somewhere. So if you can't talk to your boss, who can you, where could you have that private conversation? And it honestly could be with anybody, because as I said, that person isn't going to be the person that can necessarily help you to fix whatever is going on, but they can be that, sounding board, signpost. You may be okay with them saying, look, I can't approach this person, but maybe you could have a word with them on my behalf. Reach out somehow is what I would say. And if you can't do it like that, then confidential helplines, your EAP, whatever else your company has in place.
And Adele, if I was a partner in a law firm or a GC or a leader in business, what are the things I could do to make a positive impact in this field?
Lead by example. Full stop. That has to be, the first thing I think that anyone in a position that can influence change should be. We should be seeing more mental health policies being introduced. We should be seeing a couple of my clients have put in place mental health champions within the workplace, which I think is a fabulous thing to do. They are not senior people. Sometimes they are just someone who has an interest in the area, and it's a good opportunity for them, for a workforce to have someone to approach. I do think policies are important. They do. Lawyers like words. We like looking at words. We like playing with words. We like rules. And so I think if you have a policy, it creates dialogue. And circulate the damn thing. Don't just stick it in a handbook and leave it there. Be open about it with your teams. Be open about it across the board. Make sure that people know it's okay to talk. And, from a personal perspective, I think, conversations around, what you're going through, whether it's, a mum juggling kids, juggling work, I'm going to put my hands up to it. I haven't found this pandemic easy on any level, because I think most lawyers can keep all of the balls in the air most of the time until someone chucks them another one. And whether that's homeschooling children or whether that's a problem in the workplace, I think people have to have the ability to talk. And I think if we as leaders are open with our teams, with our organisations, we participate in the dialogue and lead by example, then junior members of organisations think it's okay to do so as well. An analogy I will give, probably when I had my kids 10, 15 years ago, you didn't own up to the fact that you were bunking off and the fact that I even still call it bunking off tells you everything you need to know, for a couple of hours to go to the kids' carol concert.
Yeah,
you said
skiving.
you had an appointment. Exactly. So whereas I made a point once I had my children, I was very, very open about that. My team now think it's completely okay to be open about the fact that they've got a problem with their kid in nursery, or she's going to have to pull out of this call. And I think if we can do it around childcare and we can do it around health, how hard is it to take that one further step and do it around mental health?
Joanne, on your side, are there particular initiatives that you've seen either for internally at Simply Business or other firms you've worked at, or in any of the law firms that that you've been particularly impressed by, or you think are worth giving a shout out to?
Yeah, there are a number of things. There are a number of things that I've seen and that we do at Simply Business as well. One thing is the Mind Workplace Wellbeing Index, which is basically a sort of a benchmark of best practice. The Mind Index is something there are, over 100 different businesses who participate in it now. And the way that works is by way of staff survey. but also people from mine coming into the business, looking at the policies, interviewing various people across the business to see what their experience actually is, because as Adele said, there's no point just having it written down in a policy. It needs to be sort of lived and breathed, and various other measures, and then putting that all together and producing a report for you, as well as where you are in the index and benchmarking you against peers and that type of thing. But we've been through that twice now at Simply Business, and actually what you find reflected back to you is very, very helpful, very useful. It's very good to know what you're doing really well. Sometimes the things you think might be quite small interventions are the things that staff really value. And you need to know that so you can do more of them and so on. And then other things where actually you could be a bit better. So that's one thing I would encourage, even if you don't participate and go the full way, take a look at take a look at the webpage and see what's in there for some ideas. The other thing for lawyers in particular that some of you might be aware of is something called the Mindful Business Charter, which is actually effectively a kind of an agreed set of ways of working between law firms and their clients. And I remember when I first looked at what was in there thinking, it is so obvious, it is so basic. It is things like, making sure that the deadlines are realistic and real, not sort of crashing the other side on a transaction with a load of comments at 5 p.m. on a Friday just to ruin their weekend. Being respectful of people's time and so on. But that Mindful Business Charter has been signed now by a number of big investment banks, big law firms as well. And again, it's about is what's on there being lived and breathed, being followed properly. But it is a way of at least bringing that mindfulness to what work you are giving, how you're dealing with your client, how you're dealing with your law firm. So those are a couple of things that are worth looking at.
When we put the podcast out, there's a number of things there are a number of initiatives and organisations that have come up in this, and I know that you've both flagged some other stuff in the run up to it. So when we put the podcast out, I'll do an article on LinkedIn with links to all of the different initiatives and organisations. So if people are interested to find out more, they can follow those on, because I know that there's a number of them that, especially I thought those mini video ones sound like an absolutely genius idea. Simple, but like super effective in terms of creating champions and people who've gone through this stuff and been very successful, and that's exactly what people need to see, I think.
Yeah, that's right. And then I think the other one other thing just to pick up on quickly, when you were talking about what senior people can do, I think in-house, if you are a GC, you may well be the company secretary as well. You may have a seat at the board table, either just being in the room or actually being on the board. And I would say that a number of companies now have got well-being and how are your staff as one of the parts of the CEO's update in a board meeting. And if it's not there, that's where you use your soft power. Why isn't that being looked at? Why isn't it being discussed? Because if you especially where you're in a people business like we are, it's another piece of management information that really should be shared and scrutinized by your board.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. And one of the questions that I've had directed to me sort of from working with people within HR and HRDs within business is, look, board are very resistant sometimes, or senior management are very resistant to talking about this. They don't feel they know enough about it. How do I influence that? How do I get them to open up? How do I get them to talk about it? And I have found, unfortunately, a very effective tool from a sort of a lawyer's perspective is to say, well, litigation risk. It's the first thing you can do to lower litigation risk.
Yeah, litigation risk, I would say absence data. You need a lot of, data always really helps. If you've got absence data, for absence, and, again, various surveys and studies have shown that, many people will not, if the reason that their absence is for mental health reasons, they won't disclose the reason. So actually be quite suspicious of if you've got large amounts of absence that's not disclosed. It's worth noting, but at the moment around half of GP appointments are related to mental health. So
that high.
The chances are the chances are that when you've got lots of unexplained absences, there is something going on.
I mean, I think especially this year within 2020, like within my friend circle, within our business, within our clients and candidates, it is writ large what's happening, and I think people are becoming more open to discussing it, because it was a very important and challenging issue before 2020, but 2020 has just poured petrol on it, with all of the various different stresses and changes that have come from it.
And it's a real opportunity to seize that and take it forward. You know, we're not all going to instantly go back to work in an office. That's not going to happen. And I think it's a really important opportunity to, yes, okay, 2020 has really put mental health under the microscope, but I think it needs to stay there. And it needs to be something that, we take this opportunity and capitalize on it for more healthy, productive workplaces. Ultimately, businesses do better if their people do better.
Never waste a good crisis.
Absolutely.
Guys, I'm cognizant that that time is pushing on. Before we go, we do ask every guest on the General Counselling podcast to nominate a GOAT, or greatest of all time lawyer. It can be someone.
I forgot about this bit.
I didn't know about this bit, so this is going to be off the cuff.
So it can be someone alive or dead, real or fictional.
Oh.
Favorite lawyer.
Okay.
You can take 5 minutes to think about it, and we'll edit that bit out. Sorry, it was in the first email, I think, maybe at the bottom.
Okay, I didn't see that. I'm going to need to come back to you on that one.
Yeah.
I literally can't do that off the top of my head. There are so many, and actually not just fictional or alive or dead or big characters. There are actually some junior lawyers that I have worked with who have actually made, I think, a real difference for clients. And so maybe that's,
well, give us a thought. We've got about 3 or 4 weeks till this goes out, and then maybe before we go out, we can do a 2-minute recap.
Let's just do, I was going to say, I just do mine quickly now, because
go for it.
Quickly now, I'm going to pick, so rather than greatest lawyer of all time and thinking about dead and all the rest, I'm going to pick 2 people, if I can, who had quite a very positive impact on me and my career, and obviously that's why they're great. No, just joking.
Fair enough.
One is a lady called Sandy Okoro, who is now the General Counsel of the World Bank. But she used to be the GC at Barings here in London, and then at HSBC, and I came across her a number of times in a kind of professional context. But I remember some years ago being at a panel of GCs where she spoke about what it meant to be a GC and how she got there. And that was actually what inspired me to think, oh, that description that she's just given sounds exactly what I want to do. and actually she was, very, very generous with her time and her advice. And it's been wonderful just seeing what she's done, since, and champion of many, many important causes is Sandy.
Okay, and then there's the second.
And then the second one is a bit strange, because I haven't been in touch with this person for years now, but it's a partner at Linklaters called Michael Voisin. I think he now heads up capital markets generally.
Derivatives partner, yeah.
Yeah, he used to be my supervisor when I was very junior, and he was in fact the trainee solicitor partner when I first qualified into that department. And the reason I'd single him out is he was somebody who, if Michael was on your team or was in a client meeting, you felt absolutely safe. He knows his stuff so well, has a knack of bringing the right people in at the right time and looking after people. And I remember just watching him when I was quite junior and just thinking, I'd like to be like that when I grow up.
He also, as I understand it, has legendary barbecues at his place in the countryside for everyone at Linklaters.
He does. We used to have our summer parties at his rather large country estate.
Fair enough. Well, look, thank you both very much for the time on that. That was a brilliant episode. I think there's some really, really interesting stuff. As I say, I will make sure that the links to the organisations and the initiatives that we covered in some of this are posted when we put the podcast out. But all that's left for me to say is huge thank you for giving up both of your time. It's clear that you're both so passionate about it and both making a fantastic contribution. So very much appreciate you giving the time up this morning. Next up on General Counselling.
Absolute pleasure. It's been really interesting.
Thank you very much. The next up on General Counselling, we're covering private equity. We'll be joined by a Magic Circle partner and the European General Counsel of one of the largest private equity firms in the world. So look out for that one. Thanks for joining. See everyone next time.